Welcome to Pacific States University's online lecture series for BBA 302, Economics for Business. Today, we are diving into monopoly, monopolistic competition, and oligopoly. Well, let's just get right into this fascinating and, frankly, completely relevant territory. Up to this point in our coursework, we have spent a considerable amount of time, maybe even a bit too much time, analyzing the theoretical extremes of the market. We've looked incredibly closely at perfect competition. And remember, that's a purely hypothetical benchmark where countless tiny firms sell completely identical products, and absolutely no one possesses even a shred of market power. But as you step outside the classroom, open your laptop to shop, or walk down the street to grab a coffee, you quickly realize that very, very few businesses actually operate in a perfectly competitive environment. Actually, scratch that. Almost none do. Today, we're crossing the threshold into the messy, highly strategic middle ground of real-world business, beyond perfect competition. We are going to explore the market structures that you interact with every single day of your life, from the local independent pizza shop on the corner to the massive airline duopolies that completely control global travel. This is the exact point in the semester where economics gets incredibly practical, highly strategic, and, for my money, a whole lot more interesting. So, let's get started. Here is the roadmap for our lecture today. We'll be moving systematically through 1. The competition spectrum, 2. Monopoly, total market control, 3. Monopolistic competition, embracing variety, 4. Oligopoly, the cartel temptation, 5. The prisoner's dilemma, and finally, 6. Efficiency versus innovation.
Section 1. The competition spectrum.
It's really time to shatter the illusion of those perfectly competitive markets we've been sketching out on the chalkboard. In a perfectly competitive world, remember the rules. Everyone sells identical products, everyone is a price taker, and if a firm tries to raise its price by even 1 single cent, it instantly loses all of its customers to the thousands of identical competitors. Now, while this perfectly competitive model provides a really beautiful, elegant mathematical framework for achieving maximum productive and allocative efficiency, it assumes away a ton of reality. It assumes away pollution, it ignores the drive for technological inventions, it brushes over imperfect information, and most importantly, it ignores human psychology's desire for variety. The real world is absolutely not populated by passive price takers selling identical widgets. It's populated by firms fiercely fighting every single day to distinguish themselves from the pack. And that brings us to the formal definition of the environment where most businesses actually live and breathe: imperfect competition. These are markets that fall squarely between the extreme, solitary world of pure monopoly and the crowded, identical world of perfect competition. The defining characteristic here, the absolutely crucial takeaway, is that firms in imperfectly competitive markets have at least some influence over the price they charge. They are not merely passive recipients of a market price dictated by some invisible hand of supply and demand. Depending on exactly where they fall in the spectrum, they wield varying degrees of actual market power. We broadly categorize these imperfectly competitive markets into 2 primary types, which we'll dissect today: monopolistic competition, which is characterized by many firms selling similar but not identical products, and oligopoly, which is characterized by just a few massive firms dominating a space.
To truly understand imperfect competition, we have to contrast it directly and thoroughly with our theoretical benchmark. Think about the left side of this comparison: perfect competition. This represents an environment with identical, homogeneous products. Think of a farmer selling standard winter wheat. Because the product is identical to thousands of other farmers' wheat, there is absolutely zero market power. The firm acts purely as a price taker. You check the commodity board for the daily price, and that's what you charge. Nothing more, nothing less. In the long run, this hypothetical market forces all firms to produce at the absolute minimum of their average cost, achieving perfect, flawless efficiency. It's great for society, but it's a remarkably tough place to run a highly profitable business. Now shift your focus to the right side: imperfect realities. This is where you, as future business leaders, will almost certainly be operating. Here, products are differentiated. They aren't identical. They are separated by style, flavor, brand perception, or even just geographic location. Furthermore, there are varying barriers to entry. It's not always easy or free for a new competitor to just set up shop and challenge you. Crucially, because of this differentiation and these barriers, firms here are price makers, at least to some degree. Because your product is uniquely yours, or because you dominate the local market, you can actually raise your prices without watching every single customer evaporate. You have to navigate intense real-world complexities, constantly balancing the aggressive desire to raise prices and maximize profit against the very real risk of driving your consumers into the arms of a competitor offering a substitute good. It's a constant, highly strategic balancing act.
Section 2. Monopoly. Total market control. If perfect competition is a market where firms have absolutely zero market power, A monopoly sits proudly at the exact opposite, extreme end of the spectrum. This is a market with no competition at all. Zero. One single firm produces all the output in a given market. Since a true monopoly faces no significant competition, it can, theoretically, charge any price it wishes, subject only to what consumers are willing and able to pay based on the downward-sloping market demand curve. Now, in practice, it's worth noting that the U.S. Department of Justice often defines a monopoly not just strictly as a single firm, but practically as a market where one firm has an overwhelmingly high market share that dictates market conditions. But you have to realize, defining the boundaries of a market can actually be quite tricky for regulators. For instance, in a very famous 1947 antitrust case, the federal government accused the chemical giant DuPont of having an illegal monopoly because it produced a staggering 75% of the cellophane in the United States. It seemed like an open and shut case. But DuPont's lawyers successfully countered that while they indeed dominated cellophane, they only had a 20% share of the broader, flexible packaging materials market, which included things like aluminum foils and moisture-proof papers. The Supreme Court actually agreed with DuPont. So, the definition of the market matters immensely. But fundamentally, when a firm truly has no close substitutes for its good, it is a monopoly. Now, a really important question should be popping into your head right now. You might be asking, Professor, if a monopoly is earning massive sustained economic profits by being the only player in town, why don't new, hungry entrepreneurs immediately jump into that market to grab a slice of those massive profits? In perfect competition, they would. The answer lies in barriers to entry. These are the powerful legal, technological, or market forces that discourage or entirely prevent potential competitors from entering a market. If you want to understand monopolies, you have to understand the walls they build around their castles. Let's break these down in detail because they are foundational. First, we have legal forces. Believe it or not, governments actively create monopolies on purpose to spur innovation. A patent gives an inventor the exclusive legal right to make, use, or sell their invention for a limited time, usually 20 years. This prevents anyone else from legally copying a newly discovered pharmaceutical drug, for example. Without that monopoly period to recoup billions in research and development, pharmaceutical companies argue they wouldn't invent the drugs in the first place. Similarly, copyrights protect original works of authorship like books, movies, and music. Trademarks protect identifying symbols or names like the Nike swoosh or the Apple logo. We also have trade secrets, which are methods of production kept fiercely secret by the firm, like the famous locked vault formula for Coca-Cola or the algorithm powering Google's search engine. Second, we have technological advantages and market forces. Sometimes a natural monopoly arises organically. This happens when economies of scale are so massively large that one single firm can supply the entire market at a much lower average cost than two or more firms ever could. Think of your local public utility company that provides water to your house. It makes absolutely no economic sense to have 5 different water companies laying 5 different sets of overlapping pipes under your street. It's more efficient for one firm to do it all. Alternatively, a monopoly might arise because a firm simply controls all of a completely scarce physical resource. Historically, the company Dubarris controlled nearly the entire global supply of raw diamonds, essentially granting them monopoly power over the diamond market for decades. If you own the only diamond mines, no one else can compete. Finally, we have predatory pricing tactics. This is a behavioral barrier. It's an illegal but historically notable practice where an existing, well-capitalized firm uses sharp, massive, but temporary price cuts to intentionally drive a new, smaller, less capitalized competitor into bankruptcy. They willingly take a short-term loss to starve the newcomer. Then once the threat is eliminated and the competitor shuts down, they immediately raise prices back up to monopoly levels to recoup their losses. It's brutal, it's illegal under U.S. antitrust law, but it's a stark example of how a firm can aggressively protect its turf. Now, notice how the monopolist's fundamental, everyday dilemma is visualized here. In a perfectly competitive firm, the demand curve is perfectly flat. But because the monopolist is literally the only firm in the market, its perceived demand curve is not flat. It is the exact same thing as the downward-sloping market demand curve. This means the monopolist faces a trade-off. If it wants to sell a higher quantity of goods, it absolutely must lower its price. It cannot sell infinite quantities at a high price. Crucially, and this is a point where students often get tripped up, look closely at the marginal revenue curve. Notice how it sits completely below the demand curve and slopes down even faster? Why does that happen? Well, think about it. If a monopolist wants to sell one additional unit, they have to lower the price. But they usually can't just lower the price for that one specific new customer. They have to lower the price for everyone. So they have to lower the price, not just on the next unit it wishes to sell, but on all previous units it was already going to sell at a higher price. Therefore, the additional revenue it gets from selling one more unit, which is the definition of marginal revenue, is strictly less than the new, lower price of that unit, because they are losing revenue on the units they could have sold at a higher price. That's why marginal revenue is always below demand for a price maker. So how do they decide what to do? To maximize profits, the monopolist will follow the absolute golden rule of economics. It will systematically produce up to the exact quantity where marginal revenue precisely equals marginal cost. But here is where the monopolist flexes its market power. Unlike a perfectly competitive firm, it doesn't charge a price equal to its marginal cost at that intersection. No, it looks vertically up from that MR equals MC intersection point all the way to the demand curve to see the absolute maximum price consumers are willing to pay for that specific quantity. And that is the price they charge. This pricing strategy creates severe economic inefficiencies for society as a whole. Monopolies are not productively efficient because they do not face the competitive pressure to produce at the absolute minimum of their average cost curve. They can afford to be a bit bloated. More importantly, they are not allocatively efficient because the price they ultimately charge the consumer is significantly higher than their marginal cost of producing the good. Society is saying, through its willingness to pay, that it values additional units more than it would cost society to produce them. But the monopolist intentionally, strategically restricts its output to keep prices and economic profits artificially high. This creates what economists call a deadweight loss.
Section 3. Monopolistic competition. Embracing variety.
Let us leave the somewhat rare world of the single-firm pure monopoly and enter a market structure that you interact with constantly. It's the most common market structure out there. It involves many, many firms competing fiercely against each other. But, and this is the vital defining distinction from perfect competition, they are selling products that are distinctive in some way. They are embracing variety. We are moving from the sterile, hypothetical world of identical agricultural widgets to the vibrant, noisy reality of shopping malls, local dining scenes, and clothing brands. To really put this staggering variety into perspective, consider that there are over 600,000 restaurants in the United States alone. Or think about a massive retail complex like the Mall of America in Minnesota. If the clothing market was perfectly competitive, the mall would just have one massive store selling generic clothes. But it doesn't. It has roughly 24 different stores selling women's ready-to-wear clothing, 50 stores selling clothing for both men and women, and 14 specialty stores. This brings us to the core concept of differentiated products. Products can be differentiated in so many clever ways by businesses. They can be differentiated by their physical characteristics. Think of a rugged Ford truck versus a sleek Tesla. They can be differentiated by the location from which they are sold. A gas station right off the highway exit can charge more than 3 miles down a dirt road. They can be differentiated by intangible aspects like brand reputation, generous return policies, or a promise of high quality. And sometimes, products are differentiated entirely by the public perception created by clever advertising. If everyone in the world wore only plain blue jeans and ate only plain white bread, our markets would be perfectly competitive. But because we, as consumers, naturally crave immense variety in our styles, our flavors, and our product characteristics, firms lean heavily into product differentiation to survive. Because a firm's product is slightly or significantly different from its competitors, it possesses what we call a temporary mini-monopoly on its specific style or brand. For example, there are thousands of places to buy a fast food burger, but only McDonald's can legally sell you a Big Mac. That exact flavor profile, the branding, the secret sauce, that's theirs. This product differentiation gives them a small, very real degree of market power, allowing them to act as a price maker for their specific item, rather than a strict, powerless price taker.
Let's look closely at the graph for a theoretical business. Let's call it the authentic Chinese pizza shop. This will help us understand the short-run decision-making process for a firm in this environment. Like a pure monopolist, this specialized pizza shop faces a downward-sloping perceived demand curve. They have some market power. However, because it has massive direct competition from other pizza places, burger joints, and restaurants down the street, its demand curve is much more elastic, meaning it's significantly flatter than a true total monopolist's curve would be. If they raise their prices too much, consumers have plenty of substitute options right around the corner. The mathematical process for maximizing profit, however, is exactly identical to a monopoly. The authentic Chinese pizza shop will meticulously find the output level where their marginal revenue precisely equals their marginal cost. If you examine the data presented here, this intersection happens at a quantity of exactly 40 pizzas. To find the price they should charge, the firm draws a vertical line straight up from a quantity of 40 to its specific perceived demand curve, determining a profit-maximizing price of $16 per pizza. Now notice the shaded box that results from this decision. At a quantity of 40, the price they are charging, $16, is distinctly higher than the firm's average cost at that level of production, which sits down at $14.50. This means the firm is earning a positive economic profit in the short run. Their unique mini-monopoly on their signature sweet and sour pizza is paying off handsomely. They are beating the average.
But, and this is a massive but in economics, short-run economic profits absolutely do not last forever in this specific environment. We really must contrast the pure monopoly with monopolistic competitor to understand why. A pure monopoly, remember, is comfortably surrounded by high, often insurmountable barriers to entry. It faces the entire market demand curve by itself and has absolutely no fear of new competition swooping in to steal its massive profits. It can earn those economic profits for decades. A monopolistic competitor, on the very different other hand, operates in a market with relatively low barriers to entry.
It's not that hard to rent a storefront and buy a pizza oven. This is the crucial, inescapable mechanism of the market. When firms in a monopolistically competitive industry are earning positive economic profits, it acts as an irresistible siren song, attracting new hungry entrepreneurs who want a piece of the action. Let's say our authentic Chinese pizza shop is wildly successful. They are making a killing. Soon, seeing those profits, a spicy Korean taco shop and a gourmet Thai burger joint will inevitably open up in the exact same neighborhood. What happens to our original, highly profitable pizza shop? As these new competitors proudly enter the market, offering similar but differentiated dining products, the quantity demanded for the authentic Chinese pizza at any given price will decline. People will want to try the new tacos. The original firm's perceived demand curve will mathematically and inevitably shift to the left. As their demand shifts left, their marginal revenue curve also shifts left. This relentless process of new entry continues, squeezing the original firm until the firm's perceived demand curve pushes so far left that it becomes perfectly tangent to its average cost curve. At this precise point of tangency, the price they can charge exactly equals their average cost per unit. The firm is now earning zero economic profit in the long run. Now, don't panic, they aren't bankrupt. Remember, zero economic profit includes accounting for a normal return on the owner's investment and time. But those excess supernormal profits are gone. The mini-monopoly is effectively neutralized by the sheer volume of alternative choices. It is also vital to explicitly note the efficiency outcomes here for your exams. Even in this long-run equilibrium with zero economic profits, a monopolistic competitor is not productively efficient. It produces at a cost that is still slightly higher than the absolute minimum of its average cost curve. This is known as the excess capacity theorem. They could produce more at a lower cost, but they restrict output to maintain their markup. It is also not allocatively efficient because the price consumers pay is still greater than the marginal cost to society of producing that last unit. You are paying a premium for variety.
Section 4, Oligopoly. The cartel temptation. Now, we are escalating the scale of business significantly. While monopolistic competition involves hundreds or thousands of relatively small players fighting it out, an oligopoly arises when a very small number of massive, incredibly powerful firms completely dominate an entire industry, capturing all or most of the total sales. Think of commercial aircraft manufacturing. That global market is completely dominated by just two titans, Boeing and Airbus. Or think of the U.S. soft drink industry, heavily controlled by the duopoly of Coca-Cola and Pepsi. These oligopoly markets are characterized by incredibly high barriers to entry. Often, this is due to massive, overwhelming economies of scale. You have to produce at a gigantic multi-billion-dollar volume just to get your average costs low enough to even begin to compete. Furthermore, the sheer cost of advertising and marketing required to challenge a globally recognized brand name like Coca-Cola acts as a nearly insurmountable financial wall for new entrants. You can't just start a cola company in your garage and take on Coke. In this high-stakes environment, these few large firms are highly mutually interdependent. Every single major decision regarding pricing, output, or advertising depends strategically on how they anticipate their few massive rivals will react. Economists often liken oligopolistic firms to a couple of angry cats in a burlap bag. They can either scratch each other to pieces in fierce margin-destroying competition, or they can cuddle up, get comfortable, and cooperate. This intense dynamic leads us directly to a profound, timeless observation made by the father of modern economics, Adam Smith, in his 1776 masterpiece, The Wealth of Nations. He wrote, quite cynically but accurately, "People of the same trades seldom meet together, even for merriment and diversion, but the conversation ends in a conspiracy against the public or in some contrivance to raise prices." Smith perfectly identified the core, unending temptation of an oligopoly. When these few massive firms look at the market, they realize a simple, highly lucrative truth. If they stop fighting and act together, they can perfectly mimic a pure monopoly. By explicitly agreeing to hold down industry output, they can artificially restrict supply, force a much higher price on the consumer, and split massive, monopoly-level economic profits among themselves. When firms formally, explicitly agree to coordinate their pricing and output levels like this, it is called collusion. A group of firms that has formalized this collusive agreement into an ongoing structure is called a cartel. The Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, or OPEC, is probably the most globally famous example of sovereign nations attempting to act as a cartel to tightly control global oil supply and prices. While explicit collusion like this is strictly, aggressively illegal for corporations operating in the United States under severe antitrust laws, the massive financial temptation to find a way to coordinate, even silently, is always present in boardrooms.
Section 5. The Prisoner's Dilemma. Strategic Uncertainty.
Because oligopolies operating in most developed nations cannot legally sign enforceable contracts to collude and fix prices, in fact, executives can go to federal prison for doing so, they exist in a constant state of immense strategic uncertainty. There is absolutely no single, perfectly predictive economic model for an oligopoly like there is for perfect competition or pure monopoly. If they manage to tacitly, quietly cooperate without speaking, they enjoy massive monopoly profits. But if one firm suddenly decides to break ranks, slash prices, and aggressively go after market share, it can drag the entire industry into a destructive, bloody price war, driving economic profits down to zero. So how do we systematically analyze this highly complex, unpredictable behavior? Well, economists rely on a fascinating discipline called game theory to understand oligopolistic decision-making. Game theory is a highly sophisticated branch of mathematics, famously advanced by scholars like John Nash, that analyzes situations in which players must make strategic decisions, knowing full well that their ultimate payoffs depend entirely on what the other players decide to do. It is a framework used widely, not just in economics, but in high-level military strategy, legal negotiations, and even evolutionary biology. In the specific context of business and our coursework, the players are the massive oligopoly firms, the decisions are their tactical choices of what price to charge and exactly what quantity to produce, and the payoffs are their resulting hard-fought economic profits. It is a game of high-stakes interdependence.
Let's see exactly how this builds into the classic foundational game theory scenario known as the prisoner's dilemma, applied to an oligopoly. This step-by-step sequence perfectly captures the immense fragility of cartels and collusive behavior. Step 1. The oligopolists, let's say Firm A and Firm B, sit down, perhaps illegally in a smoke-filled back room, and clearly recognize the immense group benefit of cooperation. They realize that by artificially restricting total market output to the exact level a single pure monopoly would produce, they can force the market price way up and maximize their collective combined profit. Let's assume they tacitly agree to each produce a strictly low quantity. They shake hands and walk away. Step 2. Almost immediately, the individual firm faces a massive, overriding private temptation. The CEO of Firm A goes back to their office and thinks to themselves, well, if Firm B actually keeps their word and restricts output to keep the price high, I can secretly ramp up production just a little bit. I can sell that extra output at the artificially high price they are helping maintain, and I can take a significantly larger share of the total industry profits for myself. It is mathematically the dominant strategy to cheat if you assume the other person is honest. Step 3. But here's the rub. Firm B is run by incredibly smart executives having the exact same Machiavellian thought at the exact same time. They realize that if Firm A cheats and expands output, Firm B will be left with restricted output and a rapidly collapsing market price. They will look like fools and lose money. So to protect themselves, Firm B decides they must also increase production. Ultimately, both firms predictably give in to the rational temptation to produce more. As a result, the total market supply expands significantly, far beyond the monopoly level, and the market price falls sharply. Step 4. The collusion completely, disastrously unravels. The firms may end up competing so fiercely, aggressively matching each other's price cuts just to aggressively defend their market share that they drive prices all the way down to the point of average cost. They end up earning zero economic profits, exactly as if they were operating in a highly competitive cutthroat market. This is the Nash equilibrium of the prisoner's dilemma. Both parties act in their rational self-interest, but both end up worse off than if they had just cooperated. Now, to prevent this disastrous unraveling from happening over and over, real-world oligopolies sometimes engage in long-term strategies like the kinked demand curve. Under this theory, competing firms tacitly, without speaking, commit to immediately and ruthlessly matching any price cuts made by a rival, severely punishing them for cheating, but they strictly ignore any price increases. This creates a severe structural disincentive to ever change prices at all, successfully stabilizing the oligopoly in a quiet, tense, but highly profitable standoff.
Section 6. Efficiency versus innovation. The ultimate market trade-offs.
As we approach the conclusion of this extensive lecture, we must take a step back and address how to evaluate the overall macroeconomic impact of these market structures on society. The imperfect market structures we have studied deeply today, monopoly, monopolistic competition, and oligopoly, literally make up the vast, overwhelming majority of the U.S. economy. We know for a mathematical fact that structurally, they fail to achieve the theoretical pristine perfection of the perfectly competitive benchmark. So, as economists and business leaders, we have to carefully weigh the substantial economic trade-offs of imperfect competition. On the negative side of the ledger, we have undeniable, mathematically proven inefficiencies. Whether it is a monopolistic competitor facing a downward-sloping demand curve or a massive oligopoly artificially restricting supply, these firms exhibit productive inefficiency. They simply do not operate at the absolute lowest point on their long-run average cost curves. They also consistently exhibit allocative inefficiency because they possess enough market power to set the price higher than the marginal cost of production. Furthermore, because these firms must constantly differentiate themselves to maintain their profitable mini-monopolies, society expends massive amounts of capital, human talent, and resources on advertising, branding, and marketing. Many economists argue these are expenses that have very little intrinsic value to human welfare. But we must look critically at the immense world-changing benefits on the other side of the ledger. These market structures provide incredibly powerful profit-driven incentives for technological innovation. In a hypothetical world of perfect competition, a firm earning zero economic profit has absolutely neither the extra capital nor the fundamental incentive to invest heavily in risky research and development. But an oligopolist, or a monopolist aggressively fighting to maintain its legal barriers to entry, will gladly pour billions of dollars into creating entirely new technologies, writing better software, or inventing life-saving pharmaceuticals. The pursuit of monopoly profit is the engine of technological advancement. And we must consider the sheer unquantifiable value of product variety and differentiation to our quality of life. Monopolistic competition gives us a rich, diverse, vibrant economy. We have endless, delightful choices in clothing styles, restaurant cuisines, vehicle designs, and entertainment entirely because firms are allowed to differentiate and seek a premium.
So, the crucial, overarching point of this entire week's material is this. Economics is fundamentally about choices and trade-offs. The theoretical, mathematical elegance of a perfectly competitive market comes at the steep cost of utter, boring uniformity. The dynamic, varied, and technologically innovative reality of our actual economy comes at the cost of structurally higher prices and systemic inefficiencies. You can't have both. As you thoroughly review the textbook materials for this unit, I want to leave you with a final, provocative discussion question to deeply ponder and aggressively debate in your course forms this week. Would you, personally, rather live in a world of perfect market efficiency, where every product is completely identified and produced at the lowest possible cost? Or are you entirely willing to accept the higher cost and structural inefficiencies in exchange for the vast product variety and relentless technological innovation driven by imperfect competition? And, as a follow-up, can there be such a thing as too much variety, where the cost of choice outweighs the benefit? Thank you for your attention during today's comprehensive lecture on monopoly, monopolistic competition, and oligopoly. Please review chapters 8 through 10 closely, pay attention to those graphs, and I look forward to reading your rigorous insights in the discussion board this week.